I had already been reading about feminism in various alternative publications for a number of years. I had joined a local and vibrant consciousness-raising group, and somehow I had gotten myself down to the first conference on women in the visual arts at the Corcoran Art Museum in 1972, a galvanizing experience for many. I had by then some strong ideas about who was included in museums and who was excluded, and what changes needed to be made. Jim Elliot was progressive and enlightened. He had for years clipped interesting articles on feminism and on a regular basis sent them down to me, and I don't know if there are a handful of you here who remember those tawny, large inter-office envelopes. Indeed, Jim had booked Lucy Lepard's groundbreaking all-women traveling exhibition, Valencia Population 7,000, into the Athenaeum in 1973. And it was Lucy's exhibit that brought Mierle Ukeles to the front steps and to the inside of the Wadsworth Athenaeum. So I was brought up short that when I informed Jim that the next Matrix sequence would include the work of Connie Zare, Blythe Bonin, and Jacqueline Gurevich, he shot from the hip without hesitation. But you can't show 3 women in a row. You probably don't need me to tell you what the logical response to that was. As full responsibility for Matrix fell to me, I had a clear sense of mission. I very much wanted to help open the doors of the museum to women artists and to persons of all backgrounds, colors, and persuasions. This was my bias, and this was my mission. Because Matrix was so low budget, and we continued to get good funding from the NEA, and then from Lannan and Warhol and Leff and Peter Norton, all subsequent directors, and there were 3 more, gave me pretty much free rein, because frankly they had much bigger fish to fry. Hartford was back then still known as the insurance city. Aetna, Travelers, the Hartford, thriving with an industry based on avoiding risk. So I was careful not to flaunt my intentions, to be a good team player, and to dress like a cross between a museum curator and a West Hartford matron. After a few years, a funny thing happened, but funny peculiar, something that opened my eyes wide. I frequently made day trips to New York City, sometimes packing in 40 or more galleries in one long, long day. On the bus or train ride down, I'd scribble away, diagramming my fast-paced route. Back then, it was Soho, Midtown, some museums, and the Upper East Side. On the train ride back, however, I relished the opportunity to think creatively about future programming for Matrix, always starting by asking myself, who would you really like to show? Whose work do you really find intriguing and challenging? And invariably, my initial private list, made for my eyes only, would almost always include mostly white men. And Ellen was nice enough to mention the women who had their first one-person shows at the Athenaeum, and I would tell you that I did show the work of men, gladly, and some of the men who had their first one-person shows in Hartford were Richard Tuttle and Danielle Buren, and Neil Jenny and Byron Kim and Glenn Ligon and a host of others. Confounded, I had to figure out why. I began to realize that most of the information coming my way was severely skewed. Who was having all of the museum shows, each accompanied by a richly informative catalog and lengthy, thoughtful reviews? Well, only white men, of course, but we actually knew that. Then I realized, as attentive as I was, as I would read articles among 4 or 5 of the important monthly art journals, they provided me with long and interesting articles embellished with multiple color illustrations, almost always on members of the male establishment, while the information I assiduously sought on women and minorities was almost always in the back of a magazine in very short reviews, which, if the artist really lucked out, would be accompanied by a small postage stamp-size image of one work in a grainy black and white. This imbalance was equally true in the 100 or more gallery announcements I received in the mail each week. In short, even though By then, the rhetoric of the art world did suggest that doors were being opened. Not so much. In fact, despite my good intentions, I was allowing myself to be brainwashed. After that, I had a much clearer sense of the urgency of aggressive affirmative action. I had a more fulsome understanding that much of the best work was, by design and by default, being severely discriminated against. I don't believe that the world of art for women and other marginalized artists is yet near to what it could be and what it should be. However, what eventually followed is the new and revised contemporary art history that we gather to celebrate here today. Now you are in for a treat. I pass the baton to my dear friend, Mierle Laderman Ukeles.
I think I need to raise this. Hi. Can you hear me? Okay. Andrea, thank you for thanking so many people. So I'm going to ride on that and get going. As I said, the art is easy. Trying to compress a lot of stuff into 25 minutes is really hard for me, but I'm going to try. I'm saying it's going to be an image bath. And I am around for the whole symposium. I would welcome your hearing from you. Any questions you might have about works that I'm going to try to go through very quickly, that you don't have a clue what I'm talking about. So please just ask me, okay? I would be very happy to do that. I became an artist to be free, to have the levels of freedom that I received from my Western culture artist heroes. Freedom to act within the artwork from my Uncle Jackson Pollock. Freedom to name something as art from my grandfather Marcel. Freedom to pass from one dimension to another from my uncle Mark Rothko. You might notice the gender. I struggled for years to win this freedom for myself. Then in 1968, out of free choice, desire, and great blessing, Jack and I had a baby. I became a mother, maintenance worker. I discovered that Jackson, Marcel, and Mark did not change diapers. I had fought so hard to get their freedoms, and I fell out of their picture. I was so powerful, giving life and keeping life alive, learning the hum of getting from one breath to the next, and learning the mind-bending boredom of repetitive task work. At times I felt as if my well-educated brain was going to blow out of the top of my head. Goodbye, it was saying to me as I changed yet another diaper. Your brain, was not made for this. Yet there she was on the changing table, smiling and gurgling at me. I loved this baby madly, twirling, and I was discovering every teeny element of the external world with her as she discovered it. I was in a full crisis. I felt like two people in the same body, the free artist and the mother, maintenance worker. Twirling, I was never working so hard in my life, trying to keep it together, yet people who met me pushing my baby carriage asked me, "Did you do anything?" Falling, twirling. Maintenance had no words, no language, no place, no culture. I was dumped outside Western culture. And I was so angry, and I felt so entitled, too. I had the best education in Western culture. Click. An honest-to-God epiphany. If I am the boss of my freedom, then I name maintenance art. I can collide freedom into its opposite and name necessity art. I name survival art. Why? Because I am the artist and I say so. Me. As artist, I must survive. It is art and art history that needs to change. Get in line. It all came together in one sitting when, in a quiet rage, I wrote the manifesto for maintenance art in October 1969. My first job after this realization, to re-see the world, to start all over again, this is the 60s, to start all over again, to be like my baby. The first part of the manifesto is ideas. I was influenced by the way the New York City Comprehensive Plan, in process at that time, was dividing up the mission of the city. What is a city? What is the job of a city? And these young planners said the city has two jobs: development, to bring everyone at least up into the middle class. Imagine. That was their mission. And maintenance, to keep the city going. I knew about it because Jack, a city planner, was working on it day and night. I flipped over this duality division. Development, to me, was the traditional linear avant-garde. And survival, what we call now sustainability, is maintenance. Part two of the manifesto is a proposal for an exhibition called Care. The first part is personal. I live in the museum with Jack and the baby. I do all the maintenance work: dust, clean, cook, feed visitors. Recrete? This is 1969. Are you even born? But I do the dishes. The museum might look empty of art, but it will be maintained in full public view. My working will be the work. The second part is society, interviews with 50 kinds of jobs, a representation of all kinds of work in our society. Previous interviews would be displayed on all the walls, and during the exhibition, interviews would be occurred during the whole length of that would be part of the content of the exhibition. Classic questions about maintenance are: how do you feel about spending the time you spend on maintenance? What is the relationship between maintenance and your freedom? What is the relationship between maintenance and life's dreams? And the third part is earth maintenance. The museum can be the fulcrum site, the active site of transformation of a culture. Everyday polluted elements, earth, air, water, are delivered into the museum. And in the museum, they're serviced and purified by scientists and pseudoscientists, artists, then returned out to the city, healthy and full of energy, so that the city life is thriving.